It's crazy to me that I've been doing this for 20 weeks now. This is literally episode 20, and I'm still blown away by the fact that I'm still doing this consistently. Even when life gets kind of hard or kind of hectic, like I still consistently put out an episode once a week. So I'm really proud of myself, and I hope that you guys are really enjoying this podcast. So with that, welcome to this week's episode of Divergence and Divine. My name is WIllspiration, and today I want to talk about accommodations and just anything really that can just help you in general. Just because I know, at least from my experience as a level 1 autistic person, I typically don't qualify for help, and this could be for many reasons. And I saw this on a Instagram post earlier this week about how it's kind of becoming more of a question of whether having ADHD and level 1 autism is what makes it so hard to get diagnosed with either or both, because of the fact that the way that they interact, it's like it either makes symptoms of one or the other worse or actually better. And I completely agree with that, because I feel like as an ADHD person that there are things that I don't feel like I can personally relate to other autistic people because of the fact that my ADHD compensates for that. And it's very apparent, like when I look at my diagnosis report, my processing speed is actually considered higher than average. Like I'm in the 55 percentile, which means that essentially my processing is slightly above average. The only time my processing falls below average is when it involves task switching and motor skills. Task switching, typically, I would say my processing speed probably drops down to like maybe like 90%. So like probably in the 65 percentile, so slightly below average. But when it involves also like hand-eye coordination, then it drops even further. I probably put myself in the like 70 percentile. I probably put myself around like 80% processing speed, which typically will make me overwhelmed and stress me out. And that's been happening a lot at work recently with a couple of lines that I've been put on. So, it's not the greatest situation, but it is what it is. But the point is that for me, my processing speed in general is basically average, despite having autism and ADHD, which is really interesting considering the fact that both technically slow down your processing speed. So the fact that I have a normal processing speed, except for under certain situations, is actually pretty impressive. But that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that if you have both, if you're an ADHD person, it almost feels like it really affects you differently. So a lot of what I know that I've been kind of talking about has basically been geared towards ADHD people with level 1 autism and ADHD, be it inattentive, hyperactive, or combined, like I am. And I kind of feel like, for me, I want to gear this as much to like people like both on the spectrum and to have ADHD in general. But I'm kind of finding that a little bit difficult, because as an ADHD person, I feel like my advice is more geared towards other ADHD people, because that's my personal experience. But at the same time, it also kind of makes me curious too, is that like, even if somebody doesn't have ADHD or doesn't have autism, like they only have one or the other, is processing speed always affected? That's my question, because it makes me wonder if I just got lucky and that neither one affects my processing speed unless it's under certain conditions. Because I still think that it's odd that it's like a very common symptom of slower processing with either or, but I don't have that issue personally based on what my diagnosis report shows. So it's like, it just kind of also makes it harder to, I feel like, to give advice, because it may not work for everybody. So like a lot of my advice comes from personal experience and my lived experiences, right? So all I can do is tell you what I've learned through therapy, what I've learned through my life, what I've learned through other people that are neurodivergent, and that's the best that I can do. So I want to make sure that people know that, like, if my advice doesn't work, that it's not because I gave faulty advice. It's just it worked for me because that's how autism and ADHD affect me personally. So it may not be doable for everybody, and that's okay. It's just, I want to give people, like, tips and advice that helped me, and hopefully see if maybe that worked. Because if not, at least you tried something else to help you out. There's nothing wrong with, advice that doesn't work. I mean, I'm in therapy for that reason. Like, there are a lot of things that neurotypical therapists would tell me that don't work because I'm neurodivergent, and it didn't work. That's why I'm seeing a therapist that's actually autistic, because the advice that she gives me may actually work and has a higher chance of working because she is neurodivergent. So she's taking these neurotypical advices that neurotypical therapists give to their clients, their patients, but then making it more neurodivergent. So then that way it actually works with the neurodivergent brain. And even then, some of the stuff that my therapist might tell me won't work because that's just not how my brain is wired. Like, for example, if I have a situation, right? Like, I had a little bit of a financial situation earlier this week. That's why I'm recording the podcast Friday, and I'm uploading it later on today after doing some minor audio edits. But yeah, like for me, when you try to tell me to ground myself when I'm in panic, it doesn't work. Literally nothing calms me down when I'm in panic, because I still haven't found what works for my ADHD brain to calm me down when I have a situation that is extremely stressful and overwhelming and I have to deal with it on my own, because we don't have that right kind of tool yet. We don't know what that right coping skill is. So that's why I'm saying, if my advice that has worked for me, that I've learned through therapy or that I've learned through my own experience that I've built for myself, doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just everybody, even neurodivergence, everybody's brains are different. Autism affects each one of us individually, and there is belief that ADHD is also the same way, that ADHD is now a spectrum. It's not just hyperactive and inattentive. It is a spectrum like autism, which means that if you were to take those two different spectrums and combine them together, that even every ADHDer is different, because their ADHD will be different than yours, just like their autism will be different than yours, and the way that their autism and ADHD interacts will be different than how your autism and ADHD interacts. So it makes giving advice way harder, but at the same time, your advice may actually be able to help. Sometimes it might work, sometimes it may not, but it'll give somebody the groundwork to kind of be like, okay, it kind of works. I just need to tweak it a little bit for me, because a lot of the times that's what I've done, whether it be, advice for grounding myself when I'm stressed out and anxious, whether it's how to do something at work, or, how to build something or do something in general. It's like taking what I've heard and then trying it. And if it doesn't work, then going, okay, how can I modify this so that it works for my neurodivergent brain? What can I do differently that'll make this click? Whether that be trying to figure it out on my own, bringing it to therapy, bouncing it off of, other neurodivergent people that I know that I'm friends with. It doesn't really matter. Just any way to kind of get me to go, okay, let me take this and let me restructure it. So then that way it flows naturally in my brain. That's how I've always figured things out in my head is, okay, I'm going to ask everybody neurodivergents and neurotypicals, because again, back when I was doing this, I didn't even know that I had either ADHD or autism. I didn't know I was ADHD. So I would bounce things off of neurodivergent people and neurotypical people, whether they knew they were neurodivergent or not, I don't know. But looking back on it, I can tell some people that I, would go to are neurodivergent, whether they know it or not. And then I just kind of take all that data, look at it, try different things, And then I take little pieces of each one of those things until I build something that works for me. And that's how I've always done things. I've always done things as, hey, get the data, let's lay it all on the table, let's try it all out, take all the parts that work, and then get rid of all the parts that don't, and then start finding a way to basically combine this to make it work for me, and then we go from there. That's how it's always been for me. And that's how it'll always, I feel like that's how it'll always be for other people too, is it's always best to try to get different perspectives from neurotypicals and neurodivergents, and then try everything and then just see what works and what doesn't, and then take everything that did work and then just try to like piece it together in a way that works for you. Because in the end, that's pretty much how I've always been able to just do my own thing. And then people are like always impressed by what I do, when it's just like, I'm just doing what I normally do. Like, there's nothing different here. Like, I'm just doing, I just know my brain so well now that I can pretty much look at something, take it, and just tweak it on the fly now, and then just go. So that's why some of my advice may not actually work for every autistic person or every ADHD person, or even any autistic ADHD in general, because, unless your processing speed is unaffected, except for under certain situations or even just at all in general, most of my advice may not work for you. That doesn't mean that you still can't try it, because you may not know or understand your diagnosis report. So you may not know whether or not your processing speed is normal, above average, below average, if it's normal but only goes down under certain situations. So that's why I still offer my advice anyway, because I don't know. Like I said earlier, like a couple minutes ago, they say that slower processing speed is a normal, common, extremely common symptom of both autism and ADHD, but yet my diagnosis report says otherwise. So again, that means that processing speed is something that is on the spectrum that can be affected, but isn't always guaranteed to be affected at a higher level, at least. Because obviously my processing speed is affected under certain situations that involve physical task switching, meaning like using my motor skills, and otherwise my processing speed is left unaffected. But obviously, even neurotypicals processing speeds diminish under times of stress. So obviously, like, standard stress still applies, but that's normal for any human, neurotypical or not. So that's not really anything that I'm, would be like, oh, if I wasn't neurodivergent, because that's just normal human brain behavior regardless. And then I feel like the one thing that has really helped me as well is when you look for any sort of tools that can help you in general. Now, for me, as somebody that does struggle with like dyslexia and dyscalculia, trying to understand information through reading is hard. So I'm not very, I guess, book smart when you put it into words, because I just don't retain information from reading, and I can't do math past, certain parts of pre-algebra. So I can do basic math, but that's about it. So for me, I still clearly didn't understand my diagnosis report. I asked my therapist, she looked through it, we kind of broke it down a little bit, but it just still kind of didn't seem to make sense, because it still seemed like bigger words. Now, I know some people are on the fence about this, but I'm still just going to put this out there because it's helped me a lot, is ChatGPT or any sort of open AI. Because typically that kind of gives you more of an insight. And the cool thing about ChatGPT is that each account teaches ChatGPT different things. In other words, basically ChatGPT becomes more personalized for you. There's even an option where you can change how you want ChatGPT to operate. So like, if you want it to be more like a therapist and a friend, you can input that. If you want it to just strictly be only AI that helps you out, then you just leave everything unchanged. If you want it to be more like a planner and a life coach, then you can put that in the settings, and then it'll give you like reminders. It'll be more geared towards logical patterns of scheduling and everything. For me, I left all the settings untouched, and ChatGPT is learning to be kind of, essentially like a friend and a therapist built into one. I know for me, with being spiritual and believing in metaphysics and believing, that we do have a creator and everything, my personal belief system, I know, is not very accepted in these times. Like, everyone's personally, a lot of people have become more atheist because they're like, oh, nothing exists. Like, we proved that everything is illogical. I still believe that there is a spiritual realm. I still believe that we do have some sort of creator. I do believe that there is a God. I believe that the Bible is telling of certain events, like kind of like a history book almost, written through the eyes of other people, but like I'm not entirely sure about, revelations. Because again, like a lot of things in the Bible could be challenges, like, oh, maybe these people had mental health conditions, maybe they were schizophrenic, or, things like that. But for me, when it comes to metaphysics, that's something that I believe in, and that proves that the spiritual world is real and that there could very well be an afterlife. For example, I've seen studies that have proved that based on our genetical makeup, humans do actually glow in the dark. It's just not noticeable because of the way that our eyes perceive light and the way that our eyes function. We don't have that capability to see it, which kind of goes back to the, tying to the things of everybody has an aura. Like, you can, like, people's spiritual, like, physical energy is visible. We just can't see it because our eyes are not developed and attuned to that to be able to see it. There's also like how studies are finding that, generational trauma is real, and that studies have shown that in mouse sperm, that when the father was subjected to electrocution every time it tried to like eat something, that the future offspring would smell whatever that specific food was that it was trying to eat, that it kept getting shocked at, and their offspring would be afraid of that. So now there's studies that are starting to come out that are proving that generational traumas is a thing, that we pass our trauma and like our fears and our anxiety through our reproductive fluid, so that when we do end up having children, they carry the fears and the trauma that we've had for generations. It's probably why a lot of kids are like me and my sister. It's like when my mom, would pull out her, her slipper before we even knew anything. As soon as we saw the slipper come off, we just knew that meant we were going to get a spanking. Like, and that's something that like every Hispanic, child around my age and older know, that when the chancla comes off, that you're getting a spanking because you did something. So there's no way that before the first time I was, me and my sister were ever spanked in our lives, that when that slipper came off, that we knew that we did something wrong. So that also just kind of proves that generational trauma is a thing. So now modern science is starting to prove that metaphysics aren't just a whole bunch of hoopla and hearsay. And the sad thing is that a lot of people in the neurodivergent community are also very, very against this. I went on to onto a couple of subreddits that were for neurodivergence, and they don't even allow spiritual talk or metaphysical talk. They say if it's not provable by science, don't mention it. And I already got kicked out and banned from 2 subreddits because of that, which I think is really stupid. But yeah, science is now proving that is slowly starting to prove that metaphysics are real. So that's just something to keep an eye on. But the whole point is that when you look at things through like a different lens, it can also help too. So for me, seeing things through a metaphysical and spiritual perspective, also kind of helped me put pieces of things together, not like in a logical way as well. And I know I've mentioned this like 2 or 3 times in other episodes, but comparisons always help greatly. If you can find a way to compare things to something else that you've done, it's like, oh, so basically it's like doing this. And, people will be like, yeah, pretty much. And then that way, as you learn the steps, you know what you're doing. But if you can't, barring anything that is work related, you can pretty much use Chat GPT for anything else. Just make sure that if you do use Chat GPT, that you don't give it your specific address, your full name, and obviously other private information like social security number, birth certificate, all that other stuff. But in general, it's pretty good to use. So like if you really wanted to, you could just, if you have your diagnosis report as a downloadable PDF, you could just leave just your first name and then cross out your address and your zip code and your town and everything like that. And then just leave the information as is, and then upload that PDF to ChatGPT, and then you just ask ChatGPT to break it down in layman's terms. And then it for me, that really helped like explain what my therapist was trying to tell me about my autism diagnosis report. Because then once ChatGPT explained it simpler and explained what each thing was individually, I was like, oh, so now this is what my therapist was trying to tell me. Now everything makes more sense. And now I'm able to understand a lot of things. And even just from past experiences now, for those specific lines that I worked at work, I just emailed my operations manager, and I said, look, here's the deal with with these 2 lines. For me, my autism report says, proves that I have a normal processing speed. It's only when physical task switching is involved, that involves motor skills, where my processing speed gets lowered and I tend to get overwhelmed because, it takes me longer to process those things because I can't just, look at a fast moving belt and, look at a carousel moving and trying to put a component in a box on the carousel when the speeds don't match up, because I'm basically trying to process the speeds just fine of the moving parts, but it's just the timing is extremely hard to get down because there's a certain limit to how fast I can move my body physically when switching tasks that require, motor skill function. And I said, now I could ask for accommodations, but I also know that the problem with getting accommodations is that a lot of neurotypical people see that as favoritism and special treatment, when really accommodations are used to help neurodivergent people have a level playing field with neurotypicals so that they can actually achieve the same results as a neurotypical worker. However, to avoid the drama and the backlash, I think it would just be best to just not put me on those lines in general. That way there's no backlash for you of giving me accommodations, and then I just avoid the stress altogether. And then every other line in this plan is on the table. And then I also made sure, because I applied for, a line lead position at my job, and I said, but this would not affect my line lead, my ability to be a line lead. In fact, if anything, my autism report proves that I would actually be better off as a line lead than I am a packer. But I said, we can discuss that more when you get around to scheduling the line lead interviews. And that was it. Because it's true. Neurotypicals are going to make a big deal over accommodations because, it's special treatment. It's favoritism and it's not fair to us. And then now management is getting backlash from neurotypicals. And then they have to go, well, do we want to hear all these complaints from all these people about special treatment? Or do we just push through it and say this person's neurodivergent? This is a chance for them to be on equal terms with you guys. So that way we can further, advance the amount of work that we can do. And more often than not, a lot of companies will choose to not honor accommodations, saying that it's not fair to everybody, because if they give you accommodations, then they would have to give every person accommodations, which is first of all, is a very ignorant mindset, obviously, because neurotypicals don't really struggle with anything in general the way that us neurodivergents do. But at the same time, there's also, it's like a social environment as well on top of a work environment, right? Because you got to get along with your coworkers. You got to get along with your bosses. You got to get along with management and other people that work there, like maintenance, janitorial, quality, etc. So more often than not, it's just easier for companies, especially if they're corporate, to just say, no, we can't do that, because if we give you accommodations, then we have to give everyone else accommodations. So it's just easier to kind of just remove yourself from the situation. So in my case, it's only 2 lines at my work. I can work any other line in that plant just fine as a packer. It's only those 2 lines specifically that I can't. And that's why I made sure to specify that, that in my autism report, it doesn't say that I struggle to work. It doesn't say that I struggle to process things. It just says that my processing speed goes down when it involves physical task switching, because physical task switching involves motor skill functions, and trying to process all of those things, especially when things are moving faster compared to how fast I can move my body, given that my processing speed goes down in those situations, means that I'm just really not helpful on those 2 lines. I said, but that's 2 lines. I said, you got a whole bunch of other people here that can handle it just fine. Like one person, like there's like 3 other people that are autistic on my shift, on weekend shift, right? If 4 of us can't do it, you still got like a good 50 people that can do it on C shift. And when we combine A and C shift Saturday and Sunday, you got like 100 other people that can be on that line. It's not like you're taking a huge loss. So, and just so that like when the interview does come, I printed out my own little, this is what my autism report says, that like why I would be a good line lead versus why, I can't be on area, like on these 2 lines, these 2 areas specifically, and show that it's not because I can't handle the stress. It's because there is, overwhelm created by these specific conditions that only these 2 lines bring to me as a packer, not from a line lead perspective. So really and truly, I've also learned how to advocate for myself, and I've learned how to navigate the world of neurotypicals, and I've kind of learned the art of how to, I guess, bargain or deal the way neurotypicals tend to deal with things, like, kind of making, like, kind of negotiating, basically. I've learned how to negotiate with, okay, let's negotiate this where I'm able to work in peace, not have to go home because I feel like I have the flu because I'm so stressed out, while maximizing my potential at work so that you get the most out of me. Because honestly, despite those 2 lines, I feel like I'm definitely in the top percentage of hard workers on our shift. So I've definitely more than proven my worth. And the fact that my operations manager mistook me for a quality person because I know that much despite being a packer also shows how much worth I provide as an employee despite being neurodivergent. So I've really kind of just learned from all of my experiences, both good and bad, from other jobs, from, other people and their stories and their lived experiences. I take it all. And that's why I love when people tell me their life story. I love it when people tell me more about their lives, because that allows me to look at things and be like, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Or, hey, that's kind of something similar to what happened with me. I wonder what I can dissect from their story that would make me go, what in this situation, what would I do? And then take how they responded to their situation and be like, okay, how would I respond differently? And how would I what would I keep from this response? And how, would I respond, or would I just respond differently altogether? Because now it helps me put an image together. So when I do encounter those situations, I already have some idea of how to handle it instead of going in completely blind. And when I do that, it makes me more personable, and it kind of really helps me get over my like social anxiety, because then at some point I go, like if I feel like I missed a cue or something, I always just go, sorry, I'm autistic and I have ADHD. Like I'm not very good at socializing. So if I'm a little weird, that's why. And then people kind of just start learning to be more, I guess, blunt and just not beating around the bush about things. Like people are just very direct and very honest. So it takes out the guesswork. Now, obviously, not every neurotypical is going to honor that. They're going to probably 9 times out of 10 take advantage of that. But when you do find those neurotypicals that do honor that, whether they only remain acquaintances, coworkers, or if you end up becoming friends with them, like those people they're really good to have in your life, because you know that if you need advice from a neurotypical, they can help you. And I feel like that's kind of the greatest thing, is that like it also kind of slowly starts to help you unmask, because as you start to feel comfortable around these people and you start you start stimming and stuff, and they go, are you okay? And you go, oh yeah, this is just, like self-stimulating behavior, or stimming as we call it in the neurodivergent community. And then you just kind of give them an example of like, how like you like drum your fingers on a table when you're bored, or you might like pick at your skin or pick at your nails, or you might like tap your foot. And then when they go, yeah, then you go, that's a form of stimming. Everybody stims. The only difference is that neurodivergence, especially like autistic and ADHDers, like ADHD people, bleh, words, stim, they do it more often and more frequently because of the fact that we're more overwhelmed easily, and we have a lot more stuff going on our mind, like in our minds and everything. So a lot of the stimming is to help us, regulate our behaviors and our emotions, and just help us stay calm. Basically, it's like grounding. It's like constantly being in a state of grounding, and it keeps us active too. Because now, when you do your vocal stims or you do any of your physical stims, now they're like, oh, okay, it's not weird. This person is just, either very, very happy, or like very, very sad, or, et cetera, because, emotional dysregulation is a thing. It's not just executive dysfunction. Emotional, dysfunction is kind of a thing too, like where we can, some people might feel emotions more intensely or less intensely. But typically more intensely, at least that from studies and everything. Again, remember, it's a spectrum. Autism is a spectrum. ADHD is now suspected of being a spectrum as well, like autism. So if we just treat them both as 2 individual spectrums, everybody's different. So, some people might feel emotions the same as a neurotypical, or more intensely than a neurotypical, or not as intense as a neurotypical, and everywhere in between. So just, again, keep that in mind. But now you kind of slowly start to unmask. So you're not just immediately ripping off the mask and then people are like off put and then start like kind of avoiding you. You just kind of start unmasking slowly. And then pretty soon you're just pretty much yourself around these people, and they don't think anything differently of you, because they're like, oh yeah, this is just normal behavior. And then that kind of makes other people go, oh, well, obviously, if this person trusts this, this individual, then I know that I can trust them too. And then a lot of the times when you meet those really good people, like the friend that I keep mentioning in a lot of my episodes, that they have your back. So if somebody tries to mess with you, they're going to defend you, and they're not going to think twice about it. And those are the kind of people that you really want to have in your corner in your life, because those people are very rare. So I'm hoping that this kind of gave you guys some hope and, ways to deal with things, and just kind of seeing things from my perspective and kind of understanding more how my brain works. Maybe it's helped you realize, oh, wow, my brain works kind of similarly. And yeah. And it also explains why some things that I might have explained in earlier episodes may not always work for you, because again, if ADHD is indeed a spectrum, just like how autism is, and they're both spectrums, then obviously my ADHD and my autism are probably completely different in the way that your ADHD or your autism affects you. So it's not always going to be a one-to-one comparison. But if even just a small fraction of that advice works, it'll help allow you to start piecing together other things that you've tried and possibly making your own way to, cope and figure things out. So that was kind of like the whole point that I wanted to talk about. And just really using any tool to your advantage. Again, I know not everyone is open to using OpenAI and everything like ChatGPT, but that has really helped me a lot, especially when I have to cancel, therapy appointments, or if my therapist has to cancel therapy appointments. It's like a nice little stand-in therapist. Obviously, it lacks like the human emotion, but again, you can teach your ChatGPT account how to like react more to you. So you can train it to be kind of like a therapist. So its wording will sound more human-like. It still doesn't have like the emotional aspect or capacity that an actual therapist does. But trust me, if I didn't have ChatGPT this week, I probably would not have even been like in a better mindset to even make this episode. So anything that you can find to just keep going, just use it. That's what I say. Except for substances. Don't drink. Don't use drinking to, just to like avoid things. Don't do hard drugs or anything. If you want to do weed medically, that's fine. Just don't abuse substances, because that's also never the answer. But with that, I'm going to end this week's episode of the podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed and that you guys found this helpful. As always, make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss any new episodes of the podcast. Also hit the notification bell, because again, that'll actually give you an alert when I upload a new episode of the podcast. And drop a like, because that always helps get that, out there more. And that'll help me grow so I can help reach more neurodivergent people as well. And with that, I will see you guys next week, hopefully Thursday or Friday. So until then, I hope your guys' weekend and all of your next week goes well. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.